At 6:47 a.m. on August 1st, 1943, two men climbed into the cockpit of a B-24 Liberator, codenamed Hell's Wench, at Libya's Benghazi airfield, one with everything to lose, the other with nothing left to prove. Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker, 36, led the 93rd Bomb Group, a seasoned commander with 11 months of brutal combat under his belt. Beside him sat Major John Jerstad, 25, a pilot who'd already checked every box. 25 combat missions completed, a ticket home to Oregon secured, his war officially over. Yet here he was, volunteering to fly a mission military intelligence called a 50% death sentence. Outside, 177 other B-24s roared to life, their engines shaking the desert tarmac as they prepared for what would be the longest, lowest altitude bombing raid in history. The target, Romania's Ploiești oil refineries, facilities pumping out 30% of Nazi Germany's fuel, the lifeblood of Hitler's war machine. To take them down, they'd have to fly 2,400 miles round trip, skimming just 50 to 500 feet above the ground, treetop level, chimney height, so low they'd dodge power lines and scare livestock. This wasn't a bombing run, it was a suicide mission. And Jerstad, who could have been boarding a ship home, had chosen to walk into the fire. The odds were stacked higher than the refinery's cracking towers. The Luftwaffe and German anti-aircraft units had turned Ploiești into the most heavily defended target in Europe. High-altitude raids had failed miserably. Bombs missed, defenses held, and Allied planes fell from the sky. The only way in was straight through. Fly between the smokestacks, drop delayed fuse bombs that would burrow into the refineries before exploding, and pray the blast didn't incinerate their own aircraft. Even training for the mission had been deadly. The 8th Air Force lost 47 B-24s to botched low-level runs. Pilots misjudged altitude over the Mediterranean, crashed into hillsides or collided mid-formation. Command estimated 90 planes would be shot down over Ploiești. 900 men, gone. Baker knew the numbers. He'd briefed his men 3 times, drilling into them the criticality of timing. 5 bomb groups must hit their targets simultaneously at 9:30 a.m. Romanian time, spreading German defenses thin. A single delay, a single wrong turn, and the entire formation would be torn apart by concentrated fire. Jerstad knew the numbers too. He was the group's operations officer, second only to Baker in understanding the mission's complexities. He'd watched comrades die in training. He'd seen the empty bunks of men who never returned from practice runs, and still he'd raised his hand. Why? Why trade a ticket home for a coffin in Romanian soil? Hell's Wench carried 10 souls that morning. Navigator Harold Sweetman, Bombardier John McCormick, Engineer James Merritt, Radio Operator Cecil Fite, and 4 gunners, each man acutely aware that 1 in 2 aircraft wouldn't make it back to Benghazi. But they also knew what Ploiești meant. 12 million barrels of refined petroleum a year. Every drop fueled German tanks rolling deeper into Russia, U-boats hunting Allied convoys, and Luftwaffe fighters intercepting bombers over Germany. Destroy Ploiești, and the war could be shortened by months. Thousands of Allied lives could be saved. For these men, the math was simple. The mission was worth the cost. At 7 a.m., the formation lifted off, 178 B-24s stretching for miles across the Mediterranean sky. They climbed to 19,000 feet initially, but the plan called for a harrowing descent to wave-top level over the Adriatic Sea, staying low to mask their approach from German radar as they crossed Greece and Yugoslavia. Baker settled into his seat, hands steady on the controls, while Jerstad ran through pre-flight checks, his eyes sharp, his movements precise, no hint of regret. Behind them, 17 aircraft from the 93rd Bomb Group formed a tight wedge, each pilot watching the tail of the plane in front, each crew member steeling themselves for what lay ahead. 3 hours into the flight, disaster struck. A B-24 from the lead navigation group lost power over the Mediterranean, carrying the mission's lead navigator, the man who knew the exact route to Ploiești. The plane descended rapidly, attempting an emergency water landing, but hit the waves at 140 miles per hour, disintegrating on impact. All crew were lost. Suddenly, the entire operation was adrift. No backup navigator knew the full route. Baker watched the formation continue north, his jaw set. Something was very, very wrong. As they crossed the Greek coast, the formation dropped to 500 feet, so low that pilots could see the faces of shepherds as they scattered their flocks. Terrain masking worked. German radar couldn't track planes flying below hilltops, but the low altitude came with a brutal cost. Increased fuel consumption, zero room for navigational error, and the constant threat of slamming into a mountainside. Baker checked his instruments repeatedly, fuel levels normal, engines running steady, but the absence of the lead navigator hung over the formation like a shadow. By 9:05 a.m., Romanian time, they reached the initial point, IP, the landmark where bombers were supposed to turn east toward Ploiești. This was make or break. Every group needed to identify the correct valley, turn at the exact moment, and follow the terrain to their assigned refineries. Without the lead navigator, the mission commander's plane took over navigation, but chaos ensued. Baker watched in horror as the lead group turned toward Bucharest, 30 miles southeast of Ploiești. Wrong city, wrong direction. 3 entire bomb groups, over 100 aircraft, were being led away from the target. The carefully orchestrated simultaneous attack was collapsing. Baker grabbed the radio, desperate to contact the mission commander. Radio discipline had been strict, minimal transmissions to avoid German detection. But this was an emergency. Static filled the airwaves. German jamming had locked onto their frequency. No response. Jerstad met Baker's gaze, and in that silent exchange, they both knew the choice. Follow the lead group to a meaningless target, wasting the lives of every man under their command, or break formation. Go alone. Lead 17 B-24s into the most heavily defended airspace in Europe, without the planned support that was supposed to split German fire. Command had predicted 50% losses with the full formation. What would it be alone? 80%? 90%? Baker didn't hesitate. In 5 seconds, he banked Hell's Wench hard left, away from the main formation, toward Ploiești. Behind him, every plane in the 93rd followed. 17 aircraft, 170 men, breaking off to face the full fury of Germany's defenses. The original plan called for 94 bombers to hit Ploiești together. Now Baker led 18. German radar operators spotted the split immediately, and flak battery commanders issued a single, deadly order. Concentrate all fire on this small group. Stop them before they reach the refineries. 11 miles from Astro Romana, the 93rd's primary target, Jerstad scanned the horizon and froze. Black smoke billowed over Ploiești, but something else dotted the sky. Small dark shapes rising from the ground around the refineries. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Barrage balloons, steel cables dangling from their underbellies, designed to shred low-flying aircraft. A single cable could tear off a wing, punch through a fuselage, or yank an engine from its mount. The defenders had raised every balloon in the city, turning the sky above Ploiești into a forest of steel. Hell's Wench was flying straight into it. At 9:17 a.m., they entered the Ploiești defense zone at 470 feet. The first 88mm shell exploded 200 feet ahead. Black smoke, orange flame, shrapnel slicing through the air. Baker flew straight through the blast. The plane shuddered, but he held course. More explosions erupted, painting the sky with tracers and black puffs of smoke. German gunners had their range: 230 anti-aircraft guns, 88mm batteries, rooftop machine gun nests. Every weapon in Ploiești opened fire at once. The barrage was so dense pilots could barely see through it. A balloon cable loomed ahead. Baker wrenched the controls left, the cable passing 20 feet from the right wing. Another to the left. He rolled right, flying by instinct, Jerstad calling out cable positions like a man possessed. An 88mm shell detonated beneath the plane, lifting it 30 feet into the air. Shrapnel tore through the belly, puncturing fuel tanks and hydraulic lines. Red warning lights flashed across the instrument panel. Fuel pressure dropping in engine 3, oil temperature spiking in engine 1. Hell's Wench was bleeding, but it kept flying. 3 miles from target, Baker aimed between 2 balloon cables, 40 feet clearance on each side. He committed to the path, then the plane jolted. A steel cable he'd missed clipped the right wing, scraping along the leading edge, tearing aluminum and catching on the outboard engine. The balloon, 300 pounds of rubber and canvas, was now dragging from the wing, creating catastrophic asymmetric drag. The plane pulled hard right. Baker fought the controls, his muscles straining to keep heading toward the refinery. Another shell struck the right wing root, punching through the fuel tank. Aviation gas sprayed into the engine compartment, igniting instantly as it hit hot metal and sparking electrical systems. Orange flames erupted from the wing, spreading toward the fuselage. Hell's Wench was on fire. 1 mile from target, 60 seconds to the bomb release point. Baker glanced down. An open field stretched below. Flat, clear, a perfect spot for an emergency landing. They could set down safely. The entire crew could survive, or they could keep going. He didn't hesitate. The nose stayed pointed at Astro Romana. Jerstad checked the bomb release panel, verifying the delayed fuses were armed. No words were needed. They were finishing this. The flames devoured the right wing, creeping closer to the fuselage with every passing second. The metal skin of the plane glowed red hot, and the cockpit temperature soared to unbearable levels. Smoke seeped in through every crevice, stinging the crew's eyes even through their oxygen masks. Baker's hands blistered on the control yoke, but he refused to relent. His focus fixed on the refinery's cracking towers looming ahead, now just moments away. Behind Hell's Wench, the 17 B-24s of the 93rd held formation, each pilot witnessing the inferno consuming their lead plane. They knew the odds, knew their commander was flying a dying aircraft, yet not a single plane broke off. They followed because Baker and Jerstad led, because the mission mattered more than their own survival. 45 seconds out, the bomb bay doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Bombardier John McCormick lay prone in the nose, his eye pressed to the Norden bomb site, tracking the Astro Romana refinery through the smoke and chaos. He calculated wind speed, altitude, and trajectory with cold precision, ignoring the heat and the distant crackle of exploding ammunition. The delayed fuse bombs needed to penetrate deep into the refinery's structures before detonating. Any miscalculation would render the entire raid useless. 30 seconds. The crosshairs locked onto the primary cracking tower. 20 seconds. Baker fought to keep the plane level, compensating for the drag of the burning wing and the constant jolt of nearby flak explosions. A stray 88mm shell shredded the left horizontal stabilizer, sending the plane into a violent yaw. But Baker corrected with a sharp jerk of the rudder, steadying the aircraft just in time. 10 seconds. McCormick's finger hovered over the release button. 5 seconds. The refinery filled the windscreen, pipes, tanks, and smokestacks now so close the crew could make out the German soldiers manning the rooftop guns. 3 seconds. "Bombs away!" McCormick shouted into the intercom, though static drowned out his words for most of the crew. He pressed the button, and 4,000 pounds of high explosives tumbled from the bomb bay, plummeting toward the Astro Romana facility. The other 17 bombers released their payloads simultaneously, unleashing 72,000 pounds of destruction on the refinery. Hell's Wench lurched upward as the weight lifted, but the reprieve was fleeting. The delayed fuses meant the worst was yet to come. Baker pulled back hard on the yoke, trying to climb above the impending blasts, but the damaged right wing barely responded. The fire had destroyed its control surfaces, leaving the plane struggling to gain altitude at a meager 100 feet per minute. The first bomb detonated 18 seconds later, tearing through the main cracking tower and reducing it to a cloud of steel shrapnel and fire. The blast wave hit Hell's Wench like a sledgehammer, sending the plane tumbling 30 degrees to the right. Baker fought to level the wings, only to be hit by a second explosion. This one from a bomb detonating in the refinery's fuel storage area. A fireball rose 300 feet into the air, black smoke mushrooming upward, obscuring the sky. The 93rd's formation scattered, each plane peeling away from the target to find an escape route through the flak and balloon cables. Some found clear air, climbing rapidly toward Yugoslavia. Others weren't so lucky. One B-24 clipped a balloon cable at full speed, its left wing sheared clean off, sending it crashing into a storage tank in a ball of flame. All 10 crew members killed instantly. Another took a direct hit to the bomb bay, its remaining ordnance detonating on impact, vaporizing the aircraft and scattering debris across 200 yards. A third lost its pilot to a 20mm round, careening into a Romanian residential area, killing 14 civilians alongside its crew. The 93rd was paying the price command had predicted, and then some. Hell's Wench climbed to 800 feet, still burning, its right wing now barely hanging on. Engine 3 seized entirely, Engine 4 lost oil pressure, and Engine 1 ran hot enough to risk seizure. Only Engine 2 sputtered along at full power, but it too showed signs of failing. Jerstad checked the fuel gauges. Both right-wing tanks were empty, ruptured by flak, and the left-wing tanks held just enough fuel for 30 minutes of flight. The Mediterranean coast was 90 minutes away. They'd never make it back to Libya. Baker assessed their options: bail out over Romania and face capture, interrogation, and likely years in a POW camp, or push on, hoping to reach Yugoslavia's partisan territory, where friendly forces might rescue them. Bailing out over Romania meant uncertainty, starvation, disease, even execution by the SS, which had a history of killing prisoners. Yugoslavia offered a slim chance of survival, but it required climbing higher, staying in the burning plane longer. Baker pulled back on the yoke, forcing the dying aircraft to climb. 900 feet, 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet. Every foot gained increased the crew's odds of reaching partisan territory, but the fire spread relentlessly. Engineer James Merritt returned to his station, ignoring the chance to bail out, and worked to transfer fuel from damaged tanks to functioning ones, adjusting the fuel mixture to keep the remaining engines running. The 4 gunners stayed at their post too, top turret scanning for Luftwaffe fighters, waist gunners watching for pursuing planes, tail gunner covering their 6. Even though the Luftwaffe had pulled back, knowing the burning bomber would crash on its own. At 1,500 feet, Engine 4 seized completely, its propeller windmilling uselessly and creating massive drag. Baker compensated with rudder, but the plane yawed right, straining against his control. Engine 3 restarted briefly, cooled by the thin air, but it ran rough, producing barely enough power to keep the plane aloft. The right wing began to bend upward under aerodynamic stress, metal groaning, rivets popping like gunshots. It was folding, slowly but inevitably. When it failed, the plane would roll inverted and spin into the ground, leaving no time for the crew to bail out. Baker pushed higher, 1,700 feet. They were 15 miles south of Ploiești, still in Romanian territory but 40 miles from Yugoslavia. 10 more minutes, he thought. Just 10 more minutes. Then Engine 1 caught fire, an internal blaze fueled by leaking oil, spreading quickly to Engine 2, their last functional engine. Baker watched in despair as Engine 2 sputtered and died, starved of oil and consumed by flame. Now Hell's Wench flew on 2 damaged, dying engines, unable to maintain altitude. It began descending, 100 feet per minute at first, then 200, the descent accelerating as the wing damage worsened. Bombardier McCormick, still in the nose, calculated their trajectory. They'd never reach Yugoslavia. The plane would crash in Romania, miles from friendly territory. Yet he didn't move toward the escape hatch. He trusted Baker, trusted the man who'd led them this far. At 1,900 feet, the right wing finally failed. With a deafening roar, the entire wing, 28 feet of aluminum, 2 engines, and what remained of the fuel tanks, tore away from the fuselage. The sudden loss of lift sent Hell's Wench into a violent snap roll, inverting in just 2 seconds. Centrifugal force pinned the crew against the walls, making movement impossible. Escape hatches now loomed above them, unreachable against gravity. Baker fought the controls, but with one wing gone, aerodynamic forces overwhelmed every input. The plane tumbled end over end, spinning toward the ground at 3,000 feet per minute. Through the windscreen, Baker saw earth and sky blur together, the altimeter unwinding rapidly. 1,800 feet, 1,600 feet, 1,400 feet. Inside the fuselage, chaos reigned. Merritt was thrown against the bulkhead, unable to reach handholds. The gunners tumbled into equipment and burning walls, their screams drowned out by the rushing wind and exploding ammunition. 50 caliber rounds cooking off in the heat, ricocheting through the cabin. McCormick watched the ground rush upward, calculating impact in 28 seconds. He didn't panic. He simply watched, accepting his fate. Jerstad remained strapped into the co-pilot seat, his harness holding him steady as the plane spun. He turned to Baker, their eyes meeting in one final, wordless exchange. They'd flown together, chosen the mission over survival together, and now they'd die together. Jerstad reached across the cockpit, gripping Baker's shoulder, a final gesture of camaraderie. Baker nodded, his hands still on the controls, a pilot to the very end. At 300 feet, the plane completed its final rotation, its nose pointing straight down. The remaining engines sputtered to life one last time, pushing the aircraft faster toward the ground, over 300 miles per hour. At 9:47 a.m., Romanian time, Hell's Wench struck the Earth, its remaining fuel detonating on impact, creating a crater 15 feet deep and 40 feet wide. Debris scattered across 200 yards, the plane disintegrating completely. All 10 crew members died instantly. Baker, Jerstad, Sweetman, McCormick, Merritt, Fight, and the 4 gunners, their bodies later identified by dog tags recovered from the wreckage. Romanian authorities arrived within an hour, burying them in a local cemetery, their graves marked with simple wooden crosses. Operation Tidal Wave concluded at 10:32 a.m. that day. Of the 178 B-24s that departed Benghazi, only 125 returned, 53 lost, 310 airmen killed, 54 captured, and 108 wounded. It was the single costliest air mission in American military history to that point, with losses exceeding even the grimmest predictions. The 93rd Bomb Group suffered the worst. Of the 18 bombers Baker led into Ploiești, only 11 made it back to Libya, 7 lost, 70 men dead or missing. But their sacrifice was not in vain. The 93rd destroyed the Astro Romana refinery completely, knocking it offline for 3 months, while the Uni area facility remained closed for 6 months. Delayed fuse bombs had torn through critical equipment, collapsing cracking towers, rupturing pipelines, and igniting storage tanks that burned for days. German engineers estimated full reconstruction would take years. Across Ploiești, other bomb groups achieved similar success. Nazi Germany's fuel production plummeted from 12 million barrels annually to less than 4 million, crippling Hitler's war machine. Luftwaffe sortie rates dropped, panzer divisions received reduced fuel rations, and U-boats spent less time patrolling the Atlantic. Historians later estimated the raid shortened the European war by 3 months, saving thousands of Allied lives. Yet the cost haunted military planners, 53 planes, 310 men, and the debate over whether the mission's success justified the losses raged throughout the war with no clear resolution. The oil was critical, the sacrifice was catastrophic. Both truths endured. 6 months later, the Medal of Honor citations arrived. 5 in total, more than any other single air operation in U.S. military history. Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker and Major John Jerstad received theirs posthumously. Baker's citation honored his decision to fly his burning plane to the target instead of making an emergency landing, leading his group through Europe's heaviest defenses at the cost of his life. Jerstad's recognized his voluntary service after completing his required tour, his refusal to abandon his post, and his commitment to the mission until the end. He was 25 years old, his war over, his ticket home waiting, yet he chose one more mission, one final sacrifice. The other 8 crew members of Hell's Wench received no individual medals. Their names appeared in casualty lists, their families notified by standard wartime telegrams that offered no hint of their courage. No mention of how they flew a burning bomber through a forest of steel cables and flak, how they stayed at their posts when survival was within reach, how they gave their lives to cripple Hitler's war machine. Harold Sweetman, John McCormick, James Merritt, Cecil Fight, and the 4 unnamed gunners faded into the background of history, their stories buried in dusty archives. But their legacy lives on, in the shortened war, in the lives saved, in the courage of 2 men who chose duty over safety, and a crew that followed them into hell. This is more than a war story. It's a testament to the quiet bravery of ordinary men who did extraordinary things when the world needed them most. They didn't seek glory, they sought to do what was right, and in doing so, They ensured that Nazi Germany's fuel pipeline would be broken and that freedom would prevail. If this story moved you, hit that like button. It helps more people discover these forgotten acts of courage. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're digging into archives every day to resurface stories of heroes who chose the mission over themselves. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Do you have a family member who served in World War II? Share your story. You're not just a viewer, you're a guardian of these memories. Together, we ensure that Addison Baker, John Jerstad, and the crew of Hell's Wench are never forgotten. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping their legacy alive.